Hey, what's up, nerds? Paul at Radio Free Hammerhal here, and you have been waiting for it for all of like a day. Kharadron Overlords, Allegiance abilities, Mathhammer. Here we go! Alright, so the basic structure we have here in their command abilities, we have some general abilities, we have our usual command traits and artifacts, we also have engine works, which are like mount traits for the ships. And then we have our skyports, which are, like the hosts or temples or what have you in other armies. However, that is optional in this army. You can also take it without a skyport and have a custom interpretation of the code. And the interesting thing about these skyports that we're going to delve into a little bit later is that they don't always necessarily lock you into a particular artifact or command trait or engine work. They are often, well, not that often, but there are a number of them that give you some flexibility and have ones that are avoidable or are not there, or, so we have some options that we'll delve into. So I'm going to be going through all of the Allegiance abilities in the book, and kind of doing the math on the things where math is important, and just doing analysis where that is relevant as well. So here we go. Just a quick cheat sheet for Mathhammer. Rerolling ones to hit or wound always improves your damage by 16 and 2/3%. Rerolling all fails on a 2-up is the same as rerolling ones. A 3-up is improved by 33%, 4-up by 50%, 5-up by 66 and 2/3%. Just as a quick reminder of the power of rerolls. So our Allegiance abilities. We really just have one generic Allegiance ability here that is our Ether Gold. So each hero, sky vessel, and Kharadron Overlords unit with 10 or more models gets one share of Ether Gold at the start of the game, once per phase. Now, it's particular to note here, it's not per turn, and it is not only on your turn, it is once per phase. You may spend one share of Ether Gold to use one of the triumphs. So there are 6 triumphs in match play. Reroll all failed hits, reroll all failed wounds, reroll all failed saves, and it's important to note that that's just till the end of the phase that you are currently in. Ignoring battle shock, rerolling a charge, which you have to do before the initial charge roll. And you can use a command ability without spending a command point. Now, the big things that we really care about here are rerolling hits, rerolling wounds, rerolling saves, and maybe occasionally getting an extra command point. So, one thing to note on the rerolling hits and rerolling wounds. Mathematically, those come out to be the same. What matters here is that there's a lot of instances where you already are getting reroll ones to hit. So, in those situations, rather than simply improving reroll ones to hit to reroll all hits, you can stack on reroll wounds. So now you're rerolling ones to hit and then rerolling all wounds. And vice versa as well. There's sources of reroll ones to wound where you would want to reroll all failed hits. But the majority of the abilities in here that are buffing your shooting in particular are rerolling ones to hit. And then if you use a share of Ether Gold, you are -1 bravery for the rest of the game on that unit. And then our other ability is Stick to the Code, which lets you build a custom interpretation of the Kharadron code which is just your option for not using a Skyport. So here are our generic Kharadron code options for building your custom Skyport. Honor is everything. Reroll hits of 1 against heroes and monsters. That is actually pretty good. A lot of the targets that are more juicy that you really want to take out are going to be heroes and monsters. So I think that's a really strong option. Master of the Skies, rerolling hits of 1 for sky vessels that target flying units. That is ultra specific, and you're only getting reroll 1s out of it. So that is going to be a challenge. There's not going to be a lot of instances where you have a lot of flying units for your ships to target. Settle the Grudges. After setup, you choose 1 enemy unit, and you can reroll 1s to hit against that unit. Our next section is the amendments. And I probably should mention, you get 1 of each of these, 1 article, 1 amendment, and 1 footnote. So our amendment options always take what you are owed. You get an extra D3 Ether Gold. That is really good. So it's, D3 extra rerolls, basically. Or extra command points, potentially. I'm not going to be using this on Battle Shock or Charges too often, because that's not really what this army does. But our big things here are being able to reroll hits and wounds and saves, which it's very valuable to get extra of those. It can make you much more potent in firepower, or much more sturdy when you are getting whacked. Prosecute wars with all haste. That gives you running and shooting during your first turn. That is also really good, and depending on the strategy that you're looking for in your particular army, the way you want to play things, that could be a better choice than getting extra Ether Gold, but it is... it's an interesting choice. I think it's really a toss-up between those two for amendments. And our third amendment, Trust Your Guns. You get +1 bravery while you're within 3 inches of enemy units. Bravery buffs in general are really weak. This army tends to be low model count and not have units with... that are very large. You're rarely going to be running units that are more than 10 models. So Battle Shock is not going to be that big of an issue for you. So Bravery also not that valuable. So that amendment, I think, is really not going to be that great for what we're doing here. Our footnotes. No reward without risk. Once per battle, reroll a charge. Not doing a lot of charging in Kharadron Overlords. So that one is not going to be that useful for you. There's no trading with some people. Once per battle, you get to run and or retreat, and then shoot and or charge later in that phase. So that is very potent, I think. Being able to get that run and shoot is important to be able to get the mobility and still keep your firepower. Are you going to use the charge that often? Probably not. And retreating, with the fly high ability, being able to disengage and fly high, which lets you then shoot later that turn. I don't know how often the retreat portion of this will come into play, but for sure, running is going to be very valuable. And then the last one, without our ships, we are not. Once per battle, you can heal a sky vessel D3 wounds. I just realized that I wrote once per battle twice on there. Oh well, just reinforcing that it's once per battle. All of the footnotes are once per battle things. So really, I think that's good. You want to protect your sky vessels, and so I think this one is kind of a toss-up between there's no trading with some people and without our ships we are not. Both of them are very good. Overall, I think you can get some strong options out of building a custom Kharadron code. You can improve your mobility, you can improve your firepower, you can protect your ships a little bit better. And by doing this, you are also freeing up your artifacts and command traits, which can be really important. A lot of very strong artifacts and command traits in this book, and many of the Skyports will force you into one particular artifact or command trait, which can make your game a little bit more difficult and restricting. So that's definitely something that we're going to be keeping in mind as we're going through everything else in the book here, that these things are an option, and they're actually pretty good, comparatively speaking. And they give you the option of going with all of the other command traits and artifacts in the book, plus, realm artifacts if you want to go in that particular route. So, that's about all on the Kharadron code. Let's move into the Skyports. BARAK-NAR. So, this one is, generally speaking, anti-battle shock and anti-magic. That is the big theme in this particular Skyport. So, our general ability off the top is Scholars and Commanders. At the start of the game, you roll a die for each of your heroes, and you get an extra CP on a 4+, which is a 50% chance per hero. Now, I think it's worthy to note here that many of the builds that I have seen people putting together, particularly ones that are, more competitive, they're running small numbers of heroes. This is not an army that really depends on its heroes very strongly. So the odds of actually getting a meaningful number of command points here are fairly low. And on top of that, we'll get into it more when we actually do a video on the heroes, but there's not a lot of command points that are really going to be spending in this army, I don't think. So your extra command points, I think, are not going to be that valuable. Our article is Respect Your Commanders. You get to reroll Battleshock tests for friendly units wholly within 12 inches of a hero in your army. As I noted before, Battleshock is not that big of a deal, particularly for this army. So that one, I think, is kind of a miss. But, all of the abilities in these Skyports can't be good. Otherwise, you'd have things that are, Petrifex Elite. So just bear that in mind going through this, that, these are pretty balanced. Our amendment, trust Ethermatics, not superstition. All of your heroes can unbind one spell per turn. That's unbind and dispel. And if they already can do it, they get an extra dispel attempt. Through knowledge power, you get +1 to all of your unbinding rolls. So you are getting a whole bunch of unbinds, and you are getting +1 to all of your unbinds. So that is very powerful, I think. There's a lot of magic floating around in the meta right now. A lot of it is magic that is buffed to high heavens, so it might be a little bit of a challenge to unbind even with that +1. But it's still worth noting. I think this might be a Skyport that shows up and surprises people in, you know, tournaments once in a while if they happen to run through and hit a lot of valuable magic that they can shut down. I think, you know, you've got some interesting possibilities there. Our command trait that we get that goes on whoever your general is, regardless of who it is. You do not take battle shock tests wholly within 12 inches of your general. I'll say it again, battle shock, not that big of a deal to begin with, and, you know, this is blowing your command trait on that when there's a lot of much better options out there. So it's a little bit disappointing to see that one. Ether Charged Rune. Once per battle, you can change one hit roll or one save roll to a roll of your choice. That's an interesting one. There's not a lot of heroes with really strong attacks. Let me maybe rephrase that. There's heroes with a good quantity of attacks. You're not seeing like D6 damage or 3 or 4 damage all that commonly, actually, or at all. There's a bunch of stuff that's D3 or 2 damage, but it being able to reroll one hit or wound roll is not, or not reroll, change the result to an auto pass is not going to do that much for you. You know, changing a save, that might be more valuable if you've got heroes that you're trying to protect. But overall, I think there's a lot of better artifact choices in here. So our real important things are going to be that we're getting a lot of extra unbinds and maybe some extra command points. You know, that's the main shtick of this particular Skyport. And the other thing to note here is that your Grunstock Thunderers become battle line in this Skyport. So that is a very popular choice. Thunderers are really strong. So that's one feather in the cap of this Skyport, is that you get Thunderers as battle line. And as we'll discuss throughout this series, battle line is kind of a problem for this army. You have one generic battle line, and that's your Arcanaut Company, and that unit is not that good. So, and I say not that good in terms of, like, in comparison to other battle lines throughout the game and other things that you want to take in this army. So being able to unlock other things in the army that can be battle line is a nice option. Up next is BARAK-ZILFIN. Our ability is Magnificent Sky Vessels, so we get one extra engine work automatically in here. It's also worth noting, I should have probably noted this off at the top, when you take a blanking for a second, a battalion in this army, you get an extra engine work as well. So if you take a battalion and BARAK-ZILFIN, you get 3 engine works for your ships, which is pretty strong. There's definitely some good engine works out there to grab, so it definitely is an attractive choice to do that. Our article is Master of the Skies. Reroll ones to hit for sky vessels that target flying units. And it should also be noted that that is one of our generic articles. That's just popping up here again in a Skyport. Our amendment is Don't Argue with the Wind. You always run 6 inches. You don't have to roll. That is strong. Mobility is very good in Age of Sigmar. The downside is there's not a lot of sources of running and shooting or running and charging. So that's really for rapid movement around the board. It's not like a rapid redeploy to shoot that often. And then our footnote, there's always a breeze if you look. If, once per battle, you can make a normal move in the hero phase with one of your units. Note it's once per battle, but it's not saying what turn once per battle. So it may be tempting to use this on the first turn for an alpha strike, but it's also very useful for later game for redeploying to another location and getting a nice large amount of movement out of your ships or other units, and particularly without having to run, getting that double move in the turn. And it's also worth noting here that a normal move does include running, so you can get that extra 6 inches twice, so you're getting 12 inches just off of runs. If you do that, say, on engine riggers, they move 12 inches on their own, so they get to move 12 inches twice, plus 2 runs of 6 is 36 inches of movement in one turn. That's a really fast unit. It's once per game, but it is certainly worth taking a look at. It's very valuable. Our command trait, and this one only goes on an admiral, so this is one that you can dodge by simply taking a general that's not an admiral. And this one, when you spend a command point on a 5-up, you get the command point back. So a 33 and a third % chance of getting a command point back when you spend one. Admirals have 4 command abilities, and a couple of them are decent. Particularly, there's one that lets a sky vessel that he is garrisoned in run and shoot, which then combines nicely with some of our other options here. So that might be a command point you're looking to spend frequently. Also, there is a generic command ability that lets you reroll ones to hit in shooting, which I think is probably where you're going to spend command points a lot in Kharadron Overlords, particularly in BARAK-ZILFIN, because you're not spending command points to run 6. You are freeing up command points there that you might otherwise be using on movement. And our artifact is the Staff of Ocular Optimization. One of the hero's missile weapons is +1 to hit. That is, that's a very powerful ability. I think this is like the only +1 to hit in the whole book. So that is very good. Particularly, you throw that on your Engine Master in dirigible suit. He's got, I believe it's a volley gun, or basically is a volley gun. I don't know. I forget what exactly it's called. But it's an 18-inch gun that shoots 6 shots, and this increases that damage by 25%. So that is definitely very powerful. Also worth noting in here is that your Archanaut frigates become battle line in BARAK-ZILFIN. When I do a video on ships, we're going to talk about frigates. I'm not a huge fan of frigates. I feel like they're kind of like the forgotten middle child, they're not they're not that exciting to me. It's like go big or go home, or run a bunch of little guys. All right, so on to our next Skyport, BARAK-ZON. Deeds, not words. This is a an interesting ability here. So your Skyfarer units get +1 to wound in melee if they charge that turn. And you get +1 to hit if the unit is a Sky Warden unit. So your Sky Wardens go up 66% in power by doing that. And that actually puts them at 60% more power than your Engine Riggers with saws at that point. So this makes Sky Wardens an interesting melee option. The downside here is, just for comparison, that makes them still less powerful than Liberators. And Liberators are widely kind of known to be this vanilla subpar sort of unit. That's kind of the baseline for everything. So if this really becomes like your best melee option in the army when you do this, and it's still less good than the boring, often criticized option of Liberators. Just let that sink in, and remember that this army is about shooting, not about melee. Honor is everything. You reroll ones to hit against heroes and monsters. Once again, that's another generic article that is being used in a Skyport as well. Leave no Dordan behind. Add 2 to the bravery of Skyfarers while they're wholly within 12 inches of a sky vessel. Again, bravery, battle shock, not that big of a deal. Particularly in this army, so that's not really going to be doing a lot for you. Our footnote is show them your steel. Once per battle in your hero phase, 1 Skyfarer unit can leave a garrison. This is a little bit weird. The only use I can think of for this is that they unload from one ship in the hero phase and then load onto another ship in the movement phase. I'm not really sure really what you're doing with this ability. Because you get to drop that Skyfarer unit without a penalty in the beginning of the movement phase anyway. So I'm not real sure why we're doing that in the hero phase. Anyway, our command trait is the Bearer of the Iron Star. This goes on whomever is your first, or whoever is your general. When the general is slain on a 2-up, he returns with D3 wounds. Heroes, again, not that important to this army, so being able to get one back when he dies is a little bit disappointing. That one's not too exciting. Our artifact is the Ether Sped Hammer, and you get +2 attacks on a melee weapon. There are a couple of heroes in here that have half-decent melee attacks, so getting extra attacks on that could be interesting and useful, but again, this army doesn't really do melee, so I'm not sure why we're really going after that here. BARAK-URBAZ. This is one of my personal favorites. A lot of other people don't really give it that much thought, I don't think, or think of it that highly. I think it's interesting. Definitely has some interesting options here. So the Market City, you don't lose 1 bravery from spending ether gold. I mean, okay. I'm not going to say that Battle Shock doesn't matter again. Oh, wait. Seek new prospects. Reroll Battle Shock tests for units in your opponent's territory. I guess I have to say it again. always take what you are owed. This is another one of the generic amendments from your custom Skyport. You get an extra D3 Ether Gold to spread around. Very strong, I think, from what I have seen in discussions of Kharadron Overlords. Like, people are just not really putting a lot of weight into the power of Ether Gold. And getting rerolls is really, really good. Whether that's, rerolls to hit, rerolls to wound, or rerolls to save, and then potentially also getting extra command points. So, a lot of good things there that we can do. And then our footnote, where there's war, there's gold. Once per battle, when a Skyfarer unit fought in the combat phase, they gain 1 share of Ether Gold. Now, here's the trick to think about for this particular one. When you have a ship get into combat with units garrisoned inside it, those units garrisoned inside are Skyfarers, and they are fighting in combat. So by your ship getting into combat, which is likely because those are juicy targets, you get an extra share of Ether Gold for the unit inside. That's pretty good. That's one of those things where you're like almost guaranteed to get this on a valuable unit every game. So I like that ability a lot. I love Ether Gold, and so getting D3 plus 1 Ether Gold out of this Skyport before we even go to command traits and artifacts is really cool. I like it a lot. Our command trait, this is only for an Ether Chemist, so you can dodge this by not having your general be an Ether Chemist. It is Chemist Supreme, and its Etheric Augmentation can target 2 units instead of 1, and that is the ability that lets a unit reroll 1s to wound. So you can pick 2 units instead of 1 to reroll 1s to wound. Rather than an artifact, we get an engine work with this particular Skyport. It's the Breath of Morgrim, and it doesn't matter what kind of ship that it goes on whatever ship you've got. In the shooting phase, pick 1 enemy unit within 6 inches. Roll a d6 for each model within 6 inches, and for every 6, that unit suffers a mortal wound. So it just kind of gives the ship a breath weapon at 6 inches. Not really exciting, but not really bad either. You're going to get into combat with your ships, and that kind of deters combat. When you get into your combat phase, you have the option to try and clear out that unit that is in combat with your ship so that it frees them up to take shots at units other than what they're in combat with. And the other important thing to note here is that your Grundstock gun haulers become battle line in this Skyport. A lot of people are running gun haulers. I think, 1 gun hauler at least is a really solid choice in most lists. So, getting your gun haulers as battle line frees up some options for your other units. BARAK-MHORNAR. Our ability is Fearsome Raiders. Enemy units are -1 bravery within 6 inches of friendly units. Not going to say it again about bravery. Our article, seek new prospects, reroll battle shock tests for units in your opponent's territory. Prosecute wars with all haste. This one is another generic amendment. It is a good one, though. Run and shoot in the first turn. And then our footnote is who strikes first strikes hardest. Once per battle at the start of your combat phase, one enemy unit within 3 inches of the enemy fights at the start of the combat phase. This is particularly restrictive because it has to be your combat phase. I would like this if it was enemy combat phase or any combat phase. That way you actually got to have, if you have a more valuable melee unit, you get to jump in front of that melee unit, or it gets to jump to the front of the line in your opponent's turn. Otherwise, here, you're mostly not going to have strong melee units. So in your turn, you're probably going to go with your good melee unit first anyway. So I'm not really seeing a whole lot of use for that particular ability. Our command trait is Opportunistic Privateer. So, the general has to start the game as part of a garrison in a ship. If so, that ship can redeploy anywhere on the board more than 9 inches away from enemy before the start of the first turn. And then that ship can't move and troops can't leave the garrison in the first battle round. Now, this is very interesting. And you might say, well, that's just a fly high ability. We don't really need another fly high because the ships can already do that. Why are we putting this ship at risk at the beginning of the game when we can just fly high in our own turn? But it's important to note here that this is not fly high, which means that your ship can be overburdened and have so many troops on it that it would not allow it to fly high and still make this move. So this is really good, really interesting. It gives you a super Death Star that you can throw in your opponent's face at the start of the first turn. And that is really interesting and powerful. The interesting thing to note here is that if you're using an Engine Master in dirigible suit, he can theoretically take this command trait. However, he can't join a garrison. So, as a result, if your general is an Engine Master in dirigible suit, this command trait does nothing. And as a result, if you are not taking an Engine Master in dirigible suit, it forces you to take 3 Arcanaut Company as battle line in this particular Skyport. So, your sacrifice here is trading off this really good command trait, but you have to have Arcanaut Companies as battle line. It's an interesting trade-off. There's definitely arguments to do it. I mean, Arcanaut Company are not terrible. They definitely have uses. So it just makes for some interesting choices to be made in list building here. It certainly does not discount this Skyport as being useful or playable. There's certainly ways to do this that are strong. It is just a thing to note here that this intersection of rules kind of creates that weird situation where, opportunistic privateer basically has to be on somebody that's not an Engine Master in dirigible suit, which means that all of your battle line have to be Arcanaut Company. Our artifact goes on a navigator, so the artifact here is one that you can dodge. However, it is really good, so I don't think you're going to be dodging this particular one. The Gale Force Stave at the start of the enemy charge phase. Pick one enemy unit within 12 inches and half that unit's charge rolls until the end of the phase. Important things to note about this. If you have a unit's charge rolls, they're probably failing that charge. It is a crippling ability to have charge rolls. It's also important to note here that you're doing this at the start of the enemy charge phase. So this is letting your enemy units move into range for a charge before using the ability. So it's not like you have to do guesswork and try and pick a unit that's going to charge in the hero phase or something like that. It's during the enemy charge phase that you get to do this. So really, you can usually have a dead giveaway of a unit moving in close to something that is really just telegraphing a charge coming up. And players just, with banter at the table will probably just say that they're going to be charging with that unit very often. So it really gives you that nice big opportunity here to use this ability and prevent an enemy charge. And not getting charged in this army is really good. Being in combat restricts what you can shoot at, and shooting is this army's shtick. So the more you are not in combat, the better off you are. And also, you really don't do anything in melee, so you want to stay out of combat because you're not gaining anything from combat either. So this artifact, one of the best ones in the book. Really big fan of that. And finally, BARAK-THRYNG. Our ability is incredibly stubborn. When a Skyfarer unit is slain on a 4-up, it fights. This would be great if we had melee units that were worth anything. But yeah, it's a thing. You might get a couple of extra wounds out of it. Alright, our article is the Chronicle of Grudges. You get to pick 3 enemy units at the start of battle, and your BARAK-THRYNG units reroll 1s to hit against those 3 enemy units. That's pretty good. Just getting free rerolls to hit against 3 units. It's usually pretty easy to pick what your juicy targets are going to be, the things that you really want to get rid of. So just putting the mark on their heads at the beginning of the game is pretty strong. But our amendment is really the thing that we come to BARAK-THRYNG for. Take help where you can get it. 1 in 4 of your units may be Duarden that don't have the Kharadron Overlords keyword. They gain the BARAK-THRYNG keyword, and they cannot be your general line or count towards your battle line. So, let's play keyword bingo. They gain the BARAK-THRYNG keyword. They do not gain Skyfarer, so incredibly stubborn does not apply. BARAK-THRYNG, however, does let the Chronicle of Grudges apply. It does not give them Skyfarer. It doesn't give them the Marine keyword, so they cannot be garrisoned in ships. And it also does not give them the Kharadron Overlord keyword. We're just getting the keyword for the Skyport, which really only affects incredibly stubborn and then our footnote, honor the gods just in case. So once per battle at the start of your shooting or combat phase, choose a BARAK-THRYNG unit, so could be your other Dwarden, until the end of the phase. All unmodified 6s to hit do 2 hits instead of 1. So depending on what your hit roll is, it's going to be, or what your stat to hit is, it's going to be a 25 to 33% increase in your chances to hit. And if you stack that with the Grudge, it increases your power in total by 36%. And that is regardless of what the hit roll stat is. I checked this like 5 times because this is like a weird coincidence that they both happen to come up the same. So, yeah, stacking those 2 abilities gives you a 36% increase. I just want to take a quick moment to apologize. I don't know if this is actually getting picked up in the recording or not. So we just got a new puppy, and she is currently sitting in my lap, and she is sleeping. And as you may be able to tell, if it's coming through on the audio, she snores. So I apologize if you're hearing that in the background. Also, I'm sitting by an open window with a nice breeze. I don't know if that's getting picked up on the audio. I really hope not, because that would suck. But it's a really nice day while I'm recording this, so fuck it. I don't care. And then, of course, while I'm doing that, my wife tried calling me on Facebook, so I apologize for the phone ringing sound if that happened to also come through. Oh, quite a little commercial break we're taking there. Anyway, moving right along, we talked about Honor the Gods just in case. So we are taking a look at our command trait, Supremely Stubborn. So your general is just incredibly stubborn on a 2-up instead of a 4-up. Your general is probably the guy that's going to be doing the most damage if he dies. So being able to do that on a 2-up is kind of cool. There's way better command traits than that, but this isn't terrible. It can do things. And our artifact, now going back to keyword bingo, this is a Skyfarer artifact. So this has to go on your Kharadron Overlords heroes. So you can technically dodge this by putting artifacts on your other Dwarden you're getting from Take Help Where You Can Get It. The catch is that because of the way all of the artifacts in this book are keyworded, that artifact would have to be a realm artifact. So just a little keyword bingo thing to note there. Technically dodgeable, but probably not. And that artifact is the Grudge Hammer. 1 melee weapon is +1 to hit. And on 6s to hit versus units that are selected in the Chronicle of Grudges, they do D3 mortal wounds in addition to normal damage. Whew! Alright, so we got through all the Skyports. Here's just a quick summary of what's going on in the Skyports. BARAK-NAR is really your anti-magic Skyport. BARAK-ZILFIN is giving you a lot of extra mobility and an avoidable command trait, which is very valuable, and it's giving you an extra engine work. This one is currently the favorite of a lot of top-level players. The artifact in here is pretty good, and mobility is probably one of the most important things in Age of Sigmar overall, so that really makes this a very popular choice. BARAK-ZON is our melee-focused Skyport. And as I've mentioned a number of times, melee is really not the thing that you come to Kharadron Overlords for. So BARAK-ZON is not going to really be doing a lot for you. BARAK-URBAZ is all about that gold, all about that cheddar. You want lots of ether gold. You have an avoidable command trait. You have no artifact. You get a entrant work that you can't avoid, but is pretty decent. Now, the extra rerolls from all that ether gold are really strong, but it may actually just be better to take no Skyport so that you're not stuck with that engine work and you can use something different instead. And you're already dodging the artifact and the command trait. You really don't want to use the command trait that's there. And the other abilities out of URBAZ are rather lackluster. So although I like URBAZ, I think taking URBAZ and doing basically the same things with no Skyport, with some other better buffs, may be a better option. BARAK-MHORNAR. This is your Alpha Strike Skyport. It's also mobility with being able to run and shoot. The artifact in here is avoidable, although the artifact is real good. It really leans into the strengths of the army in general. So it's an interesting choice. BARAK-THRYNG. This is one that I am just like waiting for somebody to break wide open. You get to use other Dwarden. And the thing that I did not mention in the BARAK-THRYNG section is that is in addition to your allies. So you can take half of your units as non-Kharadron Overlords stuff. And there's no point limitation on the BARAK-THRYNG ability. So you just take, your 400 points of allies plus whatever stuff you want in BARAK-THRYNG, and you have a really interesting mixed force. There's some ups and downs to that. Overall, the shooting in this army is not very powerful. It is just a very high quantity of shooting. So by shoving in a lot of units from other factions, you're decreasing your firepower, which means you're overall decreasing the reason that you're playing Kharadron Overlords to begin with. But it is definitely interesting. The grudge ability against 3 units, getting to reroll hits against those is a pretty solid buff. Getting to fight after death is okay. I'm not going to argue with it. This just has a lot of interesting abilities, a lot of interesting potential. I'm definitely going to be devoting a whole video to just BARAK-THRYNG at some point, as well as allies. There's a lot of options that we have here. And as I forgot to mention before, it's also picking out that Dwarden keyword. So it's important to note there that if you are playing a game, whether it's a casual game with your friends, or if you're playing a game in a tournament where they are allowing compendium units, all of those compendium units still have the Dwarden keyword. So that really unlocks a lot of other stuff. And oddly enough, unless there's some ruling to the contrary. This lets you throw hell cannons in this too, which is just funny. So, our command traits. Moving right along here. We got through the Skyports and everything related to those. Skyport related stuff is going to continue to come up, but here we go. So, our Skyports in relation to command traits: BARAK-NAR, BARAK-ZON, BARAK-MHORNAR, BARAK-THRYNG. All of those dictate what your command trait is going to be. ZILFIN and URBAZ both have command trait options that are specific to one hero. So in ZILFIN, if your general is not an admiral, you can take whatever command trait you want. And similarly in URBAZ, with an ether chemist. So just avoid an ether chemist general and you can do whatever you like in URBAZ. Like many other books, we have some command traits that are really available to everybody. The first one is Wealthy. The general gets an extra share of ether gold. Usually not that exciting, but it's an interesting default for your Endrin Master and Dirigible suit, because he does have quite a bit of shooting attacks, and it doesn't hurt to have extra save rerolls for him either. Tough as Old Boots, you get 2 extra wounds on your general. The Grudge Bearer, this one is not available to navigators. It's available to everybody else, though. Pick an enemy hero, and you double damage in melee against that hero. Did I mention that melee is not a thing in this army? Yeah. So, Wealthy, though, is pretty good. As I've mentioned, I really like Ether Gold. So, our command traits for our Arcanaut Admiral. So, we can only use these in URBAZ or a custom Skyport. Cunning Fleet Master. 1 sky vessel gets a free move after setup. And if it's not an ironclad, that can include a fly high. That's a really good choice. It gives you extra mobility. Mobility is one of the strongest things in Age of Sigmar to be doing. So that is a really good option. Although Admirals, I'm kind of up in the air on how often you actually want to run these, but it makes for an interesting choice. War Wound, in the hero phase, you roll a d6. On a 1, the general is -1 to hit, so you get a penalty. On a 2+, you get an extra command point, and we've discussed how I feel about command points in this army. Not super useful. And the last one here for the Admiral, a Scholar and an Arcanaut, you get an extra footnote from the generic footnotes. And just to recap, there's no reward without risk. Once per battle, you can reroll a charge. There's no trading with some people. Once per battle, you can run and or retreat and shoot and or charge. That's probably the one that you want. And then without our ships, we are not. Once per battle, you heal a sky vessel D3. That one's also pretty good, but you probably want there's no trading with some people. So our Endrin Master, this can go into ZILFIN, URBAZ, or a custom Skyport. Grandmaster, his Endrin Master ability heals 1 additional wound per hero phase to a ship that he is I believe it's within an inch of. So it can be either the dirigible suit or the foot engine master that is garrisoned inside. Great Tinkerer, you add 2 attacks to the Gaze of Grugni. That is a rather weak shooting attack, so I'm not sure that's really all that valuable. Endrin Professor, in each hero phase you can use a command ability without spending a command point, and that is his command ability without spending a command point. And what that does is it lets your Endrin riggers within 18 inches re-roll their Endrin craft ability, which you roll a d6 for each model within, I want to say, 6 inches of a ship, and on a 4-up it heals 1 wound on the ship. So that is a long road to get to maybe healing a ship some for free. Shrug. Moving along. Our Etheric Navigator, this one is usable in ZILFIN, URBAZ, and a custom Skyport. The first one is Stormcaller. You can reroll the Ether Storm ability. And that is on a 3-up, a unit within 36 inches halves their movement. Halves their movement characteristic until your next hero phase. So by getting that reroll, it gets up to 89% odds of success, which is real good. Ride the Winds. If it's garrisoned in a sky vessel, the sky vessel is +3 movement. That's definitely pretty good. Not sure if I would take that necessarily, but it is interesting. Movement is always good. 3 inches, not that exciting. Skeptic, you get +1 to Dispel and Unbind. Diviner, you pick one terrain feature and you don't take battle shock tests within 12 inches of that terrain feature. Another ability preventing battle shock that we don't need. Ether Chemist. So we can use these in ZILFIN or a custom Skyport. Nose for gold. In each hero phase, you roll a d6. On a 5-up, you get an extra ether gold, but it goes to your general. And there's not a lot of good things to do on an ether chemist with ether gold. Genius in the Making, your etheric augmentation ability, that is your reroll once to wound, is extended to 18 inches from 12 inches, so it's just extending that bubble of effect, or not bubble of effect, because it's choosing one unit, so it's just increasing the range that you can hit that unit. And our last one is Collector. So if this general has an artifact, one additional hero can have an artifact. This is probably one of the best choices in the book. It lets you trade, essentially, your command trait for another artifact, which is super good because there's some super good artifacts. Speaking of artifacts, here are our Skyport restrictions on artifacts. BARAK-NAR, BARAK-ZILFIN, BARAK-ZON, BARAK-THRYNG. All of those, your first artifact is set. Now, you can get extra artifacts either through taking a battalion or through using the Collector command trait. BARAK-THRYNG, it is only for a Skyfarer hero, which is going to be where your artifacts go most of the time anyway. BARAK-MHORNAR, it goes on your Navigator, and BARAK-URBAZ has no artifact. So, URBAZ wide open, MHORNAR pretty open, and all of the rest are really restricting our first artifact. All right, our artifacts for our Arcanaut Admiral, which we can take in URBAZ, MHORNAR, or a custom Skyport. We got Master Wrought Armor. We get a 6+ save against wounds and mortal wounds. I mean, not terrible, not great, not super exciting, but if you're really looking to protect your Admiral, it's a thing you can do. Hammer of Etheric Might. 6s to hit, do mortal wounds in melee. He's only got 3 melee attacks, so you're only going to average that once every other combat phase that he's in. Gatelson's Endless Repeater. He gets +2 attacks on his volley pistol, which only has 9-inch range, so it really limits the viability of that. It's not going to be that strong. And the stats on the volley pistol are not extraordinary either. Rune of Mark. Choose one enemy hero after setup. If that model is slain, the 3 closest friendly Kharadron Overlords units each get a share of Ether Gold. That is pretty damn good. I really like that a lot. That may be a reason to run an Admiral. I don't know. I like it. What I'd like to see an FAQ on is what happens if, like, you have a ship and the ship has more than 2 units in it and it's the closest thing, right? So you have a situation where you have more than 3 units that are equally distant. I assume the answer is probably just you get to pick, but come on, GW, give us an FAQ on a weird corner case situation. I know you love to do that. So getting extra Ether Gold, always good. It's the 3 closest. It's not necessarily the Admiral. And I don't know if this ability goes away if he dies. I think you pick the enemy, and then if that model is slain, you get this. I don't think that he still has to be alive for that to take place. Anywho, Flask of Vintage Amber Whiskey. Once per battle, you can either heal D6 wounds or just a flat 2 wounds. Pretty good for keeping your guys alive, although there's a lot better options out there for artifacts. I'm not gonna really be that concerned about keeping my Admiral alive all that often. And the Proclamator Mask Hailer. Once per battle round, he can use a command ability for free. Once again, I am skeptical of how many command points you're going to be using. Although, there's a lot of different places in this book where you pick up extra command points. And with one of the generic command abilities being reroll 1s to hit in the shooting phase, it makes me wonder if maybe there's a command point oriented build out there that is handing out lots of those rerolls. Combining that up with the Ether Gold maybe, and getting a lot of power boosts. It's an interesting thought. Alright, so our artifacts for our Etheric Navigator, and we can use these in URBAZ or a custom Skyport as our first artifact. Our Cyclonic Ethometer gives +1 to your Ether Storm roll. That's the ability that halves an enemy movement characteristic. So it moves it from a 3-up to a 2-up, so a 2/3 chance to a 5/6 chance. So 83%. Definitely very good. And combined with the command trait that you can have with a navigator, you can either have 2 navigators that are doing this very reliably, or 1 navigator that is just basically automatically doing this. Your choice. Really, or you also have the ability in 2 different places to boost up the power of your navigator. Definitely powerful. Like, that's a really powerful ability. More powerful against some armies than others, but it is definitely strong. The Varagstein Illuminator Flare Pistol. So the first time his missile weapon scores a hit, you can reroll hits against that target for the rest of that shooting phase. That's an interesting one. His missile weapon has a 15-inch range, so that makes him a pretty decent option to stick onto one of your sky vessels and enable a bunch of rerolls potentially. I don't know if there's going to be any targets that are like big enough that you really want to do that are not targets that are so big you want to avoid. I guess it kind of depends. It's good that it's not that it has to damage them, that it's just scoring a hit. So you've got 2 shots and it hits on a 3-up, so you've got a pretty good chance of doing that on the first turn. Yeah, it's an interesting choice. It's another source of getting some more rerolls, which I'm always a fan of. And then the Voidstone Orb. Once per battle, you can automatically dispel or unbind a spell, which is very good. You know, dispel scrolls are always a valuable thing to have. With all of the other good choices in this book, I'm not sure how often I would take that, but it's still good. It's still a good choice. I'm sure we're going to see plenty of those in lists. Moving on to Endrin Masters, these are broken out into the 2 different kinds of Endrin Masters that we have. So our Endrin Master with Endrin Harness, he can get a Cogmonculus. Once per phase, he can reroll 1 hit or wound roll for the bearer, or 1 save roll. Not that exciting. Ether Quartz Monolens. The Gaze of Grugni shooting attack is extended to 18 inches. Again, Gaze of Grugni is not that good, so this is, I don't think, is really that great of a choice. Seismic Shock Gauntlets. After a charge, you can pick 1 enemy unit within 1 inch and roll a d6. On a 2-up, that unit suffers 3 mortal wounds. There's a lot of conditions in there, and I don't see my Endrin Master charging that often. So, Endrin Master with Dirigible Suit. The Ether Injection Boosters, he can retreat and use Disengage and Fly High, which he normally cannot do on his own without a ship. So it definitely makes him more durable and more mobile. You know, you can do weird tricks Like, if you are confident you're going to get the next turn, you can charge him into something with the intent of just doing some damage, surviving, and then flying high the next turn. Some cheeky shenanigans that you can probably pull with that. Phosphorite bomblets. Everybody seems to love this. I'm not that excited about it. So once per battle, in the shooting phase, you can pick an enemy unit within 6 inches and roll a d6. On a 2-up, that unit takes a mortal wound. And then you keep doing this over and over again until you fail. I feel like this is not huge. I think this is mathematically kind of comparable to like a d6 mortal wounds. Probably a little bit better than a d6. I didn't go through and do like the actual like analysis of what the real average of this happening is, to come up with what your reasonable expectations are, because the math in that would be a little bit complicated. I tried doing some basic math on it, and I kind of gave up. And then our miniaturized Ethermatic Repulsion Field, he gets to ignore spell effects on a 3-up. Pretty decent, but again, there's other artifacts that are just better. If my choice here is I have to, put a gun to my head, take an Endrin Master with Dirigible Suit with an artifact, I'm probably taking the Ether Injection Boosters. Alright, then Ether Chemist. Emergency vent plates once per battle at the start of the enemy shooting phase. Subtract 1 from hit rolls that target the bearer and friendly units wholly within 6 inches. That's an interesting choice to protect your units on foot. I'm not sure how great that is. This also does not work. Well, actually, this appears to... Subtract 1. I think this may work when he's garrisoned in a ship. I would have to look again at the actual wording in the book. Caustic Anatomizer. Once per battle at the start of the combat phase, roll a d6 for each enemy model within 6 inches, and those models suffer a mortal wound on a 5-up. That's kind of interesting. Jumping him out of a ship and then charging him into combat just to kind of spray mortal wounds around is not terrible. That could have some interesting possibilities. But the king of all artifacts in this book, Spell in a Bottle. You get to cast an endless spell without restrictions, without rolling. It can't be unbound. It just happens. I'm going to have to do a video just on the options for this. There's a lot of great choices. This is a very, very powerful ability, and it should be noted that all restrictions are lifted from it, so you can take not just the generic endless spells, you can take the army-specific endless spells. You still have to pay the points for them, but this is super interesting. Super interesting. There's a lot of folks that have been running this. Just to give you an idea of some of the things you might be able to do, you can use this with the Skaven Warp Lightning Vortex, which prevents units from running and does a whole bunch of mortal wounds to units that are within range of the vortex. And then you combine that with your Navigator, which is having their move characteristic. So you're really potentially getting a unit bogged down and, ground away by that endless spell. So that's definitely really good. And there's other sorts of things. I really like taking a unit of 20 Iron Drakes and throwing them across the board with the Soul Scream Bridge. That's another really cool option that you can take here. There's a plethora of things that you can do with Spell in a Bottle. I'm just naming a couple of the cool ones that I've thought of off the top of my head. Alright, now moving right along, these are our engine works. These are our mount traits for our ships. Up first we have the the engine works for our Ironclad. The first one is the last word. When an enemy ends a charge within 3 inches of this model can shoot either its Great Sky Cannon, Great Sky Hook, or Great Volley Cannon at that unit. This is a really nice ability because that ship is probably going to get charged at some point, and it's going to average about 3.5 damage. And oddly enough, you can actually spend Ether Gold to boost this up. Because Ether Gold doesn't specify like what you're doing in what phase. So since this is a charge phase, you can use it to use the re-rolling hits triumph. So interesting. Alright. Hegson Solutions old reliable hull plates just gives the ship 2 extra wounds. Ebullient Buoyancy aids. You ignore the limitations for disengage and fly high. So normally an Ironclad, if it has 16 or more models in it, it loses the ability to disengage and fly high, which is your teleport ability, and it halves the movement characteristic as well. So this ignores that and really lets you create like a crazy Death Star Ironclad and throw like more than half of your points onto the ship and just have it bomb around and kill everything. The Prudency shoots. If the ship is destroyed, all of the models in the garrison automatically survive. Normally you would have to roll and see if they survive or not. This just lets you not roll. They all pop out. The Magnificent Omniscope gives you an extra 2 inches of movement. Not terrible, but I like a lot of the other ones here better. And then the Zanbar Corp Deal Breaker Battle Ram. After a charge movement, pick an enemy unit within 1 inch, roll dice equal to the charge value. For each 4-up, the enemy suffers 1 mortal wound. So your average roll is a 7. 4-up is half of that, so averaging 3.5 mortal wounds. So, you're probably going to get 3 or 4 mortal wounds out of this thing every time you use it. Note, it's not the distance charged, it is just the value of the charge dice. So, you can roll boxcars and do 6 mortal wounds. It is pretty good. So, our frigate, this one also has the Magnificent Omniscope, increasing our movement by 2 inches. And the Prudency shoots that save all of the mortals in our garrison when the ship gets exploded. And then our last ones is the Malefic Sky Mines. Once per battle, at the start of the combat phase, pick 1 enemy unit that can fly within 6 inches, roll a d6. On a 2 or 3, the unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. On on a 4+, I definitely typed that wrong in here. It does d6 mortal wounds because it has to target an enemy unit that's charging your ship that can fly, this is very, very limited. So if you're taking a frigate, you're stuck with Prudency Shoots or Magnificent Omniscope, which are both really not exciting engine works. Our gun hauler. Let's see if I can pronounce all these things correctly. Igrin Kaz Surge Injection Engine Mark IV. It adds D3 movement to the ship, and you can instead add 2d3, but if you roll doubles, you take a mortal wound, which comes out to a 33% chance to take a mortal wound to get an average of an extra 4 inches of movement. That's pretty good. Like, movement in general is a good thing. Gun haulers are already moving 12, so getting that movement up to 14 to 18 is certainly a valuable thing to do. The Zanbar Corp Det Settler Spar Torpedo. Once per battle after this model makes its first charge move, pick one enemy unit within 1 inch, roll a die. On a 2+, the unit suffers D6 mortal wounds. So you have an 83% chance of doing an average of 3.5 mortal wounds. It's definitely one of the better ones here for your gun hauler. I actually kind of like all of these for the gun hauler. I think they did a nice job in the design of the gun hauler engine works, which is great after the utter fail on the frigate, but we're not going to dwell on that too much. Coalbeard's collapsible compartments. You can garrison 5 models in it, so it just makes it a secondary troop ship. And it's a nice, interesting option to really increase the threat, to have like a secondary ship threat that is highly mobile and has a lot of firepower. I like it, and the other interesting note here is that gun haulers don't have a damage table, so even if they're on 1 wound left, they can still disengage and fly high, and if they're at full capacity at 5 models, they can still disengage and fly high. So that is definitely pretty strong. I think is going to be getting a lot of play, as well as the Det Settler Spar Torpedo. Your Surge Injector engine is also good, but I think the other two just outshine it. If we had worse other options, then people would take that one more. Anywho, moving right along. Here is just something that I was tooling around with that is an interesting thought, and you can kind of pull things out of this for different options and things that you can do. So you can really build a very Ether Gold heavy list. You would take BARAK-URBAZ, so you get D3 Ether Gold right off the top, and then after you get a Skyfarer unit into combat, they get 1 more Ether Gold. You can take the Wealthy Command trait on your general to get 1 more Ether Gold, and then you can take the Arcanaut Admiral's artifact, the Rune of Mark, that can give you an extra 3 Ether Gold. So you're looking at a possible D3 plus 5 extra Ether Gold in this particular combo, which grants you all kinds of rerolls and special goodies, which I really like a lot. So there you have it. That is the basic breakdown of the Mathhammer and analysis on the Kharadron Overlords allegiance abilities. So I figure an hour and a half is, good to talk about just that. I am up to 2 hours of recording time, and we haven't talked about units or real math yet. So, like and subscribe to see those videos that are coming that are going to take a long time to do as well. And there's a lot more math coming on Kharadron Overlords. I hope this was informative to everybody. And as always, if you want to support the channel, we do have a Patreon link down in the description. So thank you all for watching, and I will talk to you all later.